When I awoke the next morning, I was surprised to find myself sprawled out on the couch with no clue how I'd gotten there. The sun was shining brightly over the city, and there wasn't a cloud to be seen. It would have been a beautiful day if not for the clouds hanging over my thoughts. I had to go back out there and get myself checked out. V was depending upon me for strength, and while her sexual appetite had been satiated for the time being, I would be useless to her if I didn't tend to my body. I was sore all over, but ironically, it was the flats of my feet that hurt the most. What had I been thinking when I took my shoes off? And that taste continued to linger in my mouth, even though I knew it was impossible. The memories from the night before slowly pieced themselves together. I'd fallen back asleep in V's arms for a while before jolting awake to the sounds of her groaning. It was far from her worst nightmare. She wasn't screaming and thrashing about, but I'd still been cautious waking her up. It didn't take long for her to calm down and fall back asleep, but after tossing and turning for nearly an hour, I gave up and crept to the couch. I listened to V snoring in the bedroom while browsing the net for the address of the nearest clinic I could visit. I was surprised to see one just half a mile away, still on Charter Street. All these years I'd driven past the building and never noticed what it was. I drifted off again at some point in the early hours of the morning. With everything that had happened, I should have felt exhausted, but I wasn't. Maybe I was simply relieved I hadn't had any nightmares of my own. But the bitterness in my mouth was becoming overpowering and making my stomach turn again. I glanced toward the kitchen, already knowing it was a bad idea. And because I knew it was bad, that meant I was still in control. I rose from the couch and followed my eyes toward the cupboard. I didn't want to wake V up, so I carefully lifted the bottle of vodka out, grimacing when it tapped against a glass, sending a loud clink into the air. Drinking in the morning was never a good sign, but I really wasn't drinking, just washing out the taste the same way I would with mouthwash, and I didn't have much confidence that coffee would be strong enough to cleanse my palate. A small sip was all I took. My tongue was like a sponge and quickly absorbed the alcohol, burning away the worst of the foul taste. I followed it with another sip and rinsed the inside of my mouth with it before swallowing. A little early in the morning, isn't it? I swallowed down the wrong pipe and broke out into a fit of coughing, forcing me to lean over the sink as my lungs protested the violent intrusion. "You all right?" V asked, patting me on the back. When I was confident my windpipe wasn't on fire, I nodded. "Yeah, you scared the shit out of me." "Clearly." V was already dressed in her usual jeans and yellow t-shirt with a frowny face on the front. She must have been in the bathroom the whole time, judging from her neatly groomed hair and the smell of soap wafting into my nostrils. She eyed me suspiciously as I continued to try to clear my throat. My throat's still a little scratchy and we're out of lozenges. All of it was true. We were out of lozenges from the last time we'd gotten sick, and my throat was still raw from everything it had been through. Nothing I'd said was a lie, and yet it was a masterpiece of deception. "Is that why you came out here?" I nodded. V glanced at the bottle suspiciously, undoubtedly trying to piece everything together. Were we out of lozenges? Was it so unusual to have a sip of booze to cure a sore throat? "Don't look at me like that," I added. "Just had a couple sips to help." The skepticism in her eyes vanished. Just as she had done last night, V rested a palm on my forehead. You don't feel warm, but your voice is still pretty rough. You might want to get yourself checked out today and make sure it's nothing serious." 2 boats, 1 direction. "I will. I'm going to swing by the clinic down the road later today." "Good. Hopefully it's nothing serious." "I'm sure it's not." I waved my hand dismissively. "Might not even be sick. You try spending day after day under the reef, feeling what others are feeling. Manifests in strange ways sometimes." V walked past me and filled the carafe with water. She seemed tired, but not as sluggish as she normally was in the morning. The shower must have helped. "Still, if you're not feeling any better by this afternoon, you should probably call and let Lizzie's know." I realized as V patiently waited for the coffee to brew that I hadn't thought about Lizzie's since I'd driven past it yesterday. I'd finished the heap of shards Susie had left, and with today being a Monday, things would be slow. But editing a smut BD would mean I'd have to feel it. "Hey," V waved in front of my eyes. "You alright?" I snapped out of my thoughts. There would be time to worry about that later. Right foot, left foot. "Yeah, I'm alright. Just feeling a little groggy is all. You want some coffee?" While the smell was appealing, the sharpness of the vodka was still fresh on my tongue. "Nah, I'm good." I paused and bit my lip before jokingly waving the bottle at her. "Want some of this?" I meant it as a joke, but V snatched the bottle from my hand before I could say anything and raised it to her lips. She took a swig and swallowed. "Fuck, that burns. I'll say this." V wiped her lips dry. "I don't mind vodka, but not for breakfast. I think I'll stick with coffee." "I can't believe you just did that." V shrugged. "The way I see it, if you're gonna get me sick, I might as well get a head start on the medicine." The coffee maker had just finished spitting out the last drops. V poured herself a cup and took a careful sip before smacking her lips in her usual adorable manner. She looked past me towards the window. At least it's gonna be a preem day outside. In fact, V stepped around the island and opened the shutters, allowing a refreshing breeze of fresh air into the apartment. A shiver quickly ran up my spine, which she must have noticed. "Too cold?" I shook my head. "No, I'm good." "Nova." She seemed to be in an unusually good mood this morning, and I found myself jealous of her. Why couldn't I be happy? V glanced at her hollow. "Fuck, I need to get a move on. Got a long drive across the city ahead of me." "You said it's nothing big," I asked, as V downed the rest of her coffee and started toward the door. "Yeah, just another transpo job for Dino. He's one of the few who'll still hire me after my falling out with Wakako. I'm trying to keep him on the hook." It wasn't lost on me the falling out, as V had referred to it, was because of me. Kabuki was a lot closer, and while the gigs had been horrible, they hadn't required her to be gone for days at a time. In a way, it seemed like all I had done was transfer the stress she was going through from one bucket to another. When V had finished lacing up her boots, she walked back into the kitchen with a mischievous glint in her eye. "By the way," she said huskily, grabbing her jacket, "thanks for last night." She planted a kiss on my cheek, followed by another on my lips. I surprised myself when my hand found its way to the back of her head and pulled her closer, crushing our lips together. The kiss quickly turned frantic before V pulled away with a gasp and licked her lips. "Fuck, Jude. If I didn't have a gig to get to?" "Maybe if you're feeling better later tonight, I'll put this tongue of mine to good use." "Hold her legs apart. Shit, she's a feisty little thing, aren't you? You want to hit her with some lace?" "Not yet. I want her to feel this. You hear me, sweetie? I'm gonna fuck you till you're begging me to come. Now, let's put this pussy of yours to good use." "We'll see," I said. "Be safe out there, okay?" V bit her lip before turning away and walking out the door. The sound of traffic drew my attention towards the window. I was on my feet before I knew it. Fear and adrenaline surged through my veins as I rushed toward the window and slammed the shutters closed, terrified that at any moment Bishop's head would peek inside. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped away and sat on the couch, never taking my eyes away. Venturing back out into the urban wilderness was something I had to do, but that didn't mean it was something I wanted to do. Christ, I was such a fucking coward. It wasn't long before I found myself sitting in my van, staring at the entrance to what apparently passed as the clinic. It was no wonder I'd never noticed it before. Nestled in between a strip mall and an apartment complex, it was an unassuming building that, like most businesses populating the north end of Little China, had been stripped of its paint long ago. The red neon cross glowing above the doorway was the only sign I could spot that this was some sort of clinic. The parking lot was mostly vacant except for a pair of cars and my van. I had almost started to think the place was still closed when someone parked a few spaces away from me. A woman emerged, not all that different in appearance from Roxanne, and nervously paced toward the entrance. The walk of shame. I'd talked about it with some of the mocks before. the ritual men and women who'd been abused or needed support had to endure. But it always remained conceptual, something to converse about while showing my support of others who needed such help. I never dreamed I would have to do it myself. More than anything, I wanted to throw the van and drive and go home so I could pop a few of these beauties to force myself into a deep, dreamless sleep where Night City couldn't touch me. Night City. Stepping back out into it was surreal. So much of it was familiar. The stench of rotting trash, the steady drone of traffic, that it almost seemed like just another normal day. Almost. The streets were narrower, and the buildings lining the streets seemed to climb higher. Even my first steps outside had felt different, though the 3 pairs of socks I'd smothered my feet in might have been the culprit. Nearly half an hour passed before my eyes were drawn back to the door. The same woman emerged and walked back to her car. There was more confidence in her stride, and the nervousness had vanished from her eyes. She glanced at me, and a silent understanding passed between us. I clenched my fists and took a deep breath, motivating myself to get out. Finally, I opened the door and stepped outside to start my own walk of shame. It wasn't as bad as I feared. No one was watching me, and the intent behind why I was here became more firmly rooted in my mind with each step I took. A gentle chime emanated from the door as I approached and stepped inside. The harsh scent of antiseptic assaulted my nostrils before the door closed behind me. It was a modest office, and the only person inside was a man situated behind a reception desk. A pair of worn chairs rested against the far wall, and a fake plant with a thick layer of dust on the leaves had been shoved between them. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked in a tired voice. My feet seemed to drag as I closed the narrow distance between us. The man was much older than I expected. He was dressed in blue medical scrubs and possessed a thin frame and smooth features, though a heavy shade of gray had settled into his hair. A clunky-looking implant with a narrow orange light rested above his left eye, the connecting wire running beneath his skin toward the back of his skull. He seemed harmless enough, but I hoped he wasn't the one who would be doing the actual examination. Yeah. I need an STD and cyberviral test." I didn't know if I was saying the right things or not. It was a walk-in clinic, and I'd naturally assumed that whoever worked here had heard it all by now. Rather than looking up at me with a bewildered expression, he instead began punching away at his keyboard, which boosted my confidence. "Name? Judy Álvarez. Gender? Female. And you said you wanted an STD and cyberviral test done today?" "Yep." More typing. I focused on the small white door behind him. Fuck, this was the last place I wanted to be. The orange light on his implant flashed. "You can go on back." He gestured toward the door. "It'll be the first door on your right. Dr. Carlyle will be with you in just a minute." I nodded and stepped around the desk. When the door opened, a short hallway was revealed to me, and I had to stifle a laugh. There was only one door on the right. There were 2 on the left, though the door at the far end was labeled restroom. I became uneasy when I stepped inside of what had to be the most sterile room I had ever seen. Not that I'd spent much time in hospitals before. Everything was white. The walls, the ceiling, the lights, even the floor. It was enough to make me squint. A row of cabinets and monitors ran along the far side of the wall, above a small desk and office chair situated nearby, but my eyes were fixed on the large examination table in the middle of the room. It was quiet. Too quiet, as I nervously paced back and forth, unsure of what to do with myself. Maybe there was somewhere less creepy I could go to, another clinic, but I couldn't put this off no matter how much I wanted to. If I had something, I needed to know as soon as possible so I could figure out what to do. My heart jumped when I heard the door across the hall open, followed by approaching footsteps. Why was I so nervous? I was bordering on panic by the time the door opened and a woman, who I assumed was Dr. Carlyle, stepped inside. "Good morning," she casually said, walking past me toward the desk. "Morning." It may have been backwards thinking to be grateful the doctor was a woman and not a man, but I couldn't hold back a small wave of relief from washing over me as she sat down and pulled a tablet out of her lab coat. "I'm Dr. Carlyle." I take it you're Judy? Yep. And how are we doing this morning? I shrugged. Fine, I guess. I'm just reviewing some notes here. Her thin fingers glided across the surface of the device in her hand with swift precision. Judging from the lack of blemishes on her dark skin and the silky hair she'd tied back in a knot, I assumed her to be close to my own age. So, she shifted her attention back to me. You're here to get checked out for STDs and anything that might be creeping around in your cyberdeck? That's right. It felt like I was already being examined as she looked me over. Her leg bounced up and down so quickly it was almost a blur. Anything in particular I should be looking for? There was a not-so-subtle insinuation in her question I didn't like. I shook my head rather than answering her out loud. Fair enough. Why don't you go ahead and sit up on the table and we'll start with the cyberscan? I did as she instructed. The thin sheet of exam paper crinkled under me as I sat and shifted, trying to get comfortable and wishing my palms weren't sweating. Dr. Carlyle rolled forward in her chair and reached towards one of the monitors on the wall. Her fingers settled upon the end of a cable jutting from the wall and drew it out in a long, smooth motion. I watched as she pulled the cable toward an electronic instrument on her desk. As soon as she inserted it into the device, there was a sharp hiss as a burst of sanitizer was applied. She turned to face me. Please look straight ahead. Again, I did as I was told. The muscles in my neck tensed when I felt the cable dance around my neuroport before making the connection. Is your deck acknowledging it? Yep, I replied as the notification appeared on my HUD. Good. It should only take a minute or two to run its scan. I nodded and took a deep breath. Look, it's not my business to ask, and I'm not doing it to satisfy my own curiosity. But it would help if I knew what to test you for. Without a good idea, we'll have to do the full battery, which might not be necessary. How the fuck was I supposed to know what I needed to be tested for? There were all kinds of shit festering on the streets, chlamydia, gonorrhea, cephalin, and it seemed like something new popped up every day. I don't know. I'd tell you if I did, but let me make this easier for you. When did the sexual contact take place? I wasn't prepared for the directness of the question. It happened, a couple of days ago. And was it oral, vaginal, anal? I flinched at the clinical way she spoke, and for the first time since I'd set foot inside, I felt heat rush to my cheeks. It was, all. I felt tiny as I spoke those words. Fortunately, she seemed to sense my discomfort and didn't press any further. Okay, that helps a lot. Means I know we'll need to do the full battery, which won't take too long. Just one last question. Do you have any other partners who will need to be notified if anything comes up positive? No, I said bluntly. I couldn't think about that right now and would cross that bridge if and when I came to it. I see. Well, looks like the cyber scan is almost done. Let's see what we turn up. I tilted my head back as she pulled the cable loose and allowed it to slide back into the wall. Even though her attention was focused on the tablet, I could still see her screen projected on one of the monitors. Long strings of data piled up one on top of the other, each ending with the word negative. All right, good news. Your deck is clean. I should have felt relieved, but my mind was already jumping ahead to what she'd mentioned about a full battery of tests. No one, not even V, had seen me nude since it had happened. Yet here I was, about to strip down in front of another stranger and let them poke and prod at me. That's good, I managed. It is. I had someone in here a week or so ago who was infected with a malignant line of coding. It wasn't doing anything to them, but whoever had infected them was being fed a live ping of their location. Who knows why? Fuck. Now, I felt relief. My mind drifted back to earlier in the morning when I'd slammed the shutters closed. I had been certain someone was waiting right outside. As it turned out, there easily could have been. Whoever had raped me hadn't done so at random. Bishop had stalked me outside of Lizzie's, and they had known who I was. And like a complete gonk, I'd gone straight home right as soon as they'd cut me loose. If they had put something on my deck, I would have led them to where we lived. Fuck, I'd put V in incredible danger and been too stupid to realize it. All right, she sighed. Now for the not-so-fun part. She reached into a cabinet and pulled out a folded gown which she sat next to me. I'll give you a couple minutes to get changed. The tests will only take about 20 minutes to complete. I nodded and remained motionless until the door had closed shut behind her. My head quickly dropped. I took a deep breath and stripped out of my clothes. I'd still worn a jacket even though it was so warm I probably could have gotten by with shorts and a tank top. My shirt and jeans were easy enough to come off, but I slowed when it came to my bra, and my fingers felt like jelly when I finally slid out of my underwear. The thin fabric of the gown did little to make me feel secure as I sat back down on the table and waited for the doctor to return. Long minutes passed. Waiting was something I'd never had much patience for, even as a child. Why was it taking her so long to come back? What was she preparing to do to me? I was chewing my nails when there was a gentle knock on the door. I'm good, I announced. The door opened and the doctor came back in. My stomach rolled at the sight of the examination gloves she'd put on. Okay, we're going to do a few different tests and we'll start with the easier ones. Should I lay down? I kept my attention focused ahead of me even as I heard her rustling through the drawers behind me. If I turned to see what she was doing, I knew it would only make matters worse. No, we're going to start with a urine sample. She emerged from behind me, holding a small cup. My nose scrunched as I accepted it and held it at arm's length. You can use the bathroom at the end of the hall. When you're finished, just leave it on the cart and come back. I was all too aware my bare ass was hanging out the back of my gown as I wandered down the hall towards the bathroom. It was an old joke, even one my abuelo had mentioned when he'd been hospitalized. But why the fuck did they do that? Was it so hard to put some goddamn Velcro on the gown so a patient didn't feel so embarrassed every time they went for a stroll? Fortunately, I hadn't gone to the bathroom before I'd left, but it still took me a while to fill the cup. It was ironic that a BD editor, who made thousands of people blow their loads each night, was too modest to even take a piss when I knew I was on the clock. My lips curled in disgust as I set the warm cup on the cart in the corner of the room and washed my hands. When I was done, I went back to the examination room and froze near the door when I saw the needle in her hand. Good, you're back. I'm gonna take a blood draw now. I'm guessing from all the tattoos that you don't have any problem with needles? I shook my head and begrudgingly sat back on the table. She was good. I had to hand her that. I barely felt the poke in my arm, and the barrel was filled with blood before the sting set in. Once she'd removed the needle, she pressed a cold wipe against my skin, causing it to immediately tighten as the anticoagulant sealed the tiny wound shut. There. That wasn't so bad, was it? Nope. Okay. This'll be the uncomfortable part. My pulse began to race. I'm going to have you lie back and set your feet flat right here. She pointed towards a small pair of indents near one end of the table. At least they weren't stirrups, but Jesus. The paper bunched up and tore as I awkwardly started to lie down. Shit. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Right. And how exactly was I supposed to do that? I allowed myself to go flat and folded my hands over my stomach, raising my knees and settling my feet where I was supposed to. How many other women had found themselves in this position? How many more would? The exam hadn't even started and I was already feeling exposed. You doing all right? I nodded and tensed when I heard plastic crinkling and being torn open. A moment later, she sat back in her chair and rolled around to the end of the table, providing herself with a ringside seat. Since you mentioned this involved both vaginal and anal contact, I'm going to start with a vaginal swab. She held up a long, glistening Q-tip attached to a rubber handle, almost as if it were her preferred instrument of torture. This shouldn't be too uncomfortable, but let me know if you feel any pain. I said nothing as I felt the cool tip begin to probe me. It wasn't painful like I'd feared, though that wasn't any reason for celebration. I was nothing more than a specimen now, something to be studied through a dispassionate lens. When she was done, she rolled away to do whatever it was that needed doing. I was almost there. Right foot, left foot, and yet the harsh sound of plastic being ripped apart caused me to shiver. I dared to glance over, and wished that I hadn't. She had another swab out and was cleaning a foreign-looking device. Foreign, yet instinctively familiar. I drew a shaky breath as she came back to me with the speculum in hand. There was no point trying to hide the fear oozing out of me. "This'll be the worst of it," she added in a reassuring voice. "But it should only take a couple of minutes." "Okay," I whispered, bracing myself for the inevitable intrusion. She wasn't lying. I hissed as the cold steel brushed against my skin and clamped my fists together when the firm point pushed past my entrance and slowly pressed forward. "You doing all right?" she asked. "Fucking preem," I spit back. She said nothing further as the cold tip finally came to a stop several inches inside of me. There was a strange sensation as the unforgiving steel rotated inside of me despite the urgent protesting of my walls. "You'll feel a little pressure now." Pressure. That was the understatement of the fucking century. The flanges slowly spread open despite my body's reluctance, exposing me to such a point I felt like I would have to stop things if they went any further. There was a limit to what I could endure, and unlike before, I could say no this time. But what would happen then? "I'm sorry." At least she had the courtesy to say that much. But this was taking too fucking long. Seconds turned into minutes, and it was only getting worse. Again, I could feel the cool, wet tip of the swab, only now it was inside of me, spinning and twirling against the raw lining of my chafed walls, sending chills along my skin. Almost done. I tried to focus on the ceiling. A faint lattice work was printed on it, and with nothing else I could do, I started counting each individual line running across its surface. If I managed to come up with a total before she was done, there would be hell to pay. Another wrinkling broke the silence. "And now I'm going to swab your urethra? You're going to feel a sting." I hissed sharply as she continued her work. Who had come up with such bullshit terminology to describe the way this felt? A sting? This felt like a fucking blowtorch. There. A welcome sigh escaped my lips as the tip and speculum were removed. I could still feel a strange, phantom-like sensation from where it had been a moment earlier, but I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me. She rolled back to her desk and pulled out a small specimen jar. With the press of a button on the rubber handle, the tip detached and dropped into it. After securing the lid and setting the jar next to the others, she reached inside of the top drawer and produced yet another tip. The same crinkling followed as she ripped the package opening and inserted it into the handle. This was the part I was dreading the most. My muscles were already clenched, and I wasn't the least bit ashamed to be trembling as she rolled back to me. "Okay, I'm going to need you to try to relax a little bit. It's natural to tense up at first, and this will be pretty uncomfortable, but the worst is already behind you. Just take a few deep breaths. I promise this will be the last part." Everything she said only made things worse. She hadn't even made contact, and my asshole had already tightened up. As soon as the cold tip brushed against the delicate orifice, I flinched. "Just relax," she reassured me as though it were second nature. I groaned as it poked its way past my opening and slowly entered me. My face twisted in discomfort as I tried to focus once again on the ceiling. But I couldn't. Just a little longer. My nails were dug deep into my palms as I drew rapid, shallow breaths through my nose. I nearly collapsed with relief when the tip was pulled out. "There. All done," she announced as she deposited it into another specimen jar. "You can relax and sit up when you're ready." Fuck. I was shaking as I sat back up and pulled the gown over my knees to cover myself. That had been pure agony. Bizarre, considering the brutality of the rape itself, which had certainly been less clinical. But they'd found a different way for me to relax. The sound of elastic being stretched drew my attention back towards her. She had taken off her gloves and was busy typing notes. "Is there anything else to do?" I asked nervously. "No, that's it. I'm going to take these to my lab across the hall and grab your urine sample. You can get dressed while you wait. It shouldn't take more than a couple of minutes." I wasn't in any kind of rush anymore as the door closed behind her. There was no chance I'd set foot inside of Lizzie's like this. Susie could fire me if she wanted to. I didn't give a fuck. I needed to pour myself a stiff drink as soon as I got home to take the edge off. It didn't take long to get dressed, though I chose to remain standing since I wasn't comfortable sitting down any longer. While I waited, I took the opportunity to send a message to Susie, letting her know I was sick and that I'd probably be out for a couple of days. There didn't seem to be any reason to worry about things tomorrow either. I could tell from the bright expression on the doctor's face when she stepped back inside holding a handful of brochures that things would be all right. Good news all around, she noted with a small smile. You're as clean as can be. Oh, thank fuck, I sighed, louder and longer than I'd realized. Bit of a load off, huh? I nodded. I guess that's understandable, considering what you've been through. What do you mean? She looked at me knowingly, shuffling the papers in her hands. Judy, you're not the first rape victim to walk in here. Not even the first one today.
But why did you make me do it, Cindy? I didn't make you, Jude. You were into it. No, I wasn't. Bullshit. Steve told me you were screaming louder than his ex, and it's not like I couldn't hear you as well. It was kind of hot, actually. But I don't like guys. And if you hadn't made me whip, then you would have gotten off anyway. You know what you are, and I do too. This was the only way I was gonna get that lease, and now I got my own place. I can have you over all the time now. It's gonna be preem, Jude. Trust me.
I must have looked like so many others who'd found their way in here, all wide-eyed and struggling to speak, failing to find any words. Look, I'm not gonna give you a big speech. I'm guessing if you came in here, it's only because, like most folks around this part of NC, it was the only option you had available to you. Just know, there are resources out there for you. Resources? What the fuck was I gonna do with a resource? Was a resource going to stop my brain from thinking those fuckers might show up at my doorstep one night? Was a resource going to keep all those memories of what they had done to me? I quickly looked away as the muscles on my face twisted. No. I refused to cry in this sterile office in front of some stranger who apparently dealt with women like me all the time. I was a fucking mox, damn it. Just because I had to come here and get checked out didn't mean I was anything like all those others. My head wasn't buried in the sand. I'd already accepted myself as a victim. When the silence that ensued became awkward, she took a small step forward and held out her hand. Here, I'm sure they'll probably end up on the side of the road, but there are some things in here that I've seen help real people before. I was even more disgusted taking the brochures out of her hand than I had been when she handed me a cup to piss in. The physical stuff will heal up in a couple of days, and the last of the ice will be clear of your system in a week, she continued. But whatever happened, and some of it's obvious, you're gonna need enough, I shouted. She was startled by my sudden outburst as I tried to calm myself. I'll look into it, okay? Hopefully that would be enough to stop her from carrying on any further. What did she expect me to do? Everyone already knew there were plenty of places to sit down, hold hands, and cry about their fucking feelings. What the hell were these pieces of paper she'd handed me with sad faces of other women on their covers going to do for me? She nodded, that same knowing look still in her eyes. I stood up and walked out the door. The good thing about a walk-in clinic was the services they offered were free of charge. They didn't offer much. If any of my tests had turned up positive, I would have been referred to either a pharmacy or to the NCMC, neither of which I could afford. But they were better than nothing, and there was no obligation. I better understood the woman I'd seen walking out of the clinic earlier as I walked the same path she had towards my van. Any fear or shame I felt was gone, and I could actually feel the weight finally lifting off my shoulders. I was clean, and I didn't give a fuck when I tossed the brochure out the window as I left. Right foot, left foot. That's all I needed to remember. That, and I'd earned myself a tall drink when I got home.